Hello, welcome to It Depends. Today I wanted to have a discussion on the ports and adapter pattern. A little kind of show note. We're moving to a more of a solo show in the afternoons where I could talk about specific software development and architecture strategies and maybe do some live coding, that kind of thing. I'm interested in kind of pursuing that route, and then additionally, we're going to host the show, a lunch and learn on Wednesdays. It'll be more formatted to the whole group. So today I wanted to talk about ports and patterns. I came across, let's see, go over here. I came across this article this morning where we're talking about the hexagonal architecture, which is also the ports and patterns architecture. I think that's the original name. I actually think this name is a little bit cooler. So we can go with this one, hexagonal architecture. So what this architecture is about is we are going to be it's basically, you can kind of think about it. I kind of think about it as like a modular monolith with swappable modules. So you can kind of think about, I have a monolith and then I have a modular monolith. Then I can go to this pattern where I'm starting to pull pieces out. Well, we're not all the way out. We're probably dealing with interfaces and DLLs and libraries that we're incorporating in for the application. And I can kind of pull these pieces out, and then these pieces become swappable. So you have your core domain logic, right? And that's going to be your primary application, your business logic, all your services needed for your application, that kind of thing. And then you have extensibility pieces that you're going to kind of build on top of that you kind of want to be, you want to be able to change those out without disturbing the core application. So some of the benefits of this particular pattern are number one, testability. Testing becomes a lot easier with this pattern because you can provide dummy implementations for, read from the database, read from a file, messaging, API calls, that kind of stuff. It's a little bit easier to mock or provide mock implementations for doing unit testing. And it's very easy to isolate your different components. So the next piece that we have, again, we talked about this just a second ago, is the modularity, right? So all of your core pieces are going to go into modules. So I kind of like the main architecture that comes to mind when I'm thinking about this is the plugin architecture, like a Chrome plugin or some other application plugin, where you're adding on to the functionality of a system, right? And you have to implement a defined interface so that the existing system is able to hook into your DLL component, whatever, and then pull that code in and then execute it. So there's a lot of interfaces going on here, and there's a lot of making sure different pieces are compatible. But it's a very interesting way to kind of add external features onto your application and keep everything modular, right? One example that I gave today where I used this pattern successfully was we had a system where the users would upload a file, and that file may or may not take a little bit of background processing going on in that file as we're prepping the file and then doing the intake and then loading the records, and we needed to send a notification. So originally the system was sending out an email. We received file X, we uploaded it and processed it, we completed it, and you can now go check the status of your file, or whatever was going on. And so we were doing that via email, but because we used this particular architecture, we were able to I was able to extend the notification system out to also include a text message. The users wanted a text message, so I created a new plugin, essentially, or the new kind of piece to plug into the application. It was a multi notification event string that did both email and text messaging, and I was able to do that without affecting any of the core components of the application, which is nice, right? Because a lot of times as we go through development, we may end up in a spaghetti code type situation, and that's never where we want to be with our code. We don't want some change to a page or a component over here to have an effect to something that's completely unrelated. That's where we get kind of the modular idea, right? These modules are separate, and this pattern kind of extends that separation out even further, and gives you the capabilities of if you want to, you can even swap them out at runtime. So I could drop in a new DLL, and as soon as that DLL gets loaded, kind of have some new features. Maybe later on this week, I was thinking about, as we progress down the week, I'm going to explore this a little bit. I was thinking about doing a live coding session where we basically have our core architecture, and then we have the hexagonal architecture for data access, and show how we could implement we could write to two different databases, both at the same time or kind of independently. So that's something I was thinking about exploring a little bit later on this week. We talked about plugins, right? So that's another benefit of this architecture. It definitely allows you to plug in new functionality. That helps with the deployment too, right? If I just need to replace a DLL that has a feature that I want to change, I'll just copy the DLL out, and I don't have to do a full production push, which, depending on your organization, may or may not be kind of required. Here's another place where I think kind of really shines is, let's say, for example, we'll go into the automotive space, and we have decided that we're going to use a company that I've worked with in the past. Highly recommend them if you need to do any type of work with VINs. It's a company called Data One, and Data One has both an API and the ability, because some of the technology in the automotive industry is a little bit backwards. They still support, FTPing you a file every morning that you can process and update your database or do whatever you need to do with the current updated VIN information. So, how this particular pattern would work well there is, I would create a service, and that service would be our, we'd call it the VIN decode service or the VIN decode module, right? And I can hide inside of my implementation the specifics behind accessing and processing data from Data One, right? And let's say everything's running fine. We're doing VIN VIN decoding. We're getting back data. Systems working great. And let's just say that Data One at some point, hopefully not, but for sake of this example, we'll say Data One goes out of business. Right, so they're no longer around. You no longer have access to their VIN decode API. Maybe it just got so expensive to decode VINs that no one's kind of supporting that at the moment. So what could happen then is, instead of the whole entire application breaking, I am because I isolated that external requirement of the application using this particular architecture, I could just swap in a new DLL that points to another provider. Let's assume there's somebody else out there that's doing it, and we do the contract, we do all that. We modify the implementation of the VIN decode service, because it's kind of a hosted module with a well-defined interface. None of the core application code has to change, because core application code doesn't care about VIN decoding. That is not our core business, right? We're not in the VIN decode business. We're outsourcing that particular features for pennies on the request, or pennies per 100 requests, or however much that costs. We're outsourcing that because we've decided that keeping track of VINs and updating the database is way too much of a headache. The government data that gets provided isn't always up to the most current. They're usually behind by, I would say, probably about 6 months. It seemed like that. And so we could then go into that particular component, and we could just replace the component with a new service provider. Let's just say that another use case here would be Data One decides that they want to significantly update their prices, and we don't feel that the service or the VIN decode that we get from them is at that price point, and we believe that we can go out and get it somewhere else cheaper. Then we could just implement for that vendor. And the cool thing is you can leave your Data One thing hanging around. I mean, obviously don't deploy it into production, but you can leave that code hanging around. If you ever go back to Data One, you just swap it back out. You say, use this component, resolve this interface using this component, and you can kind of switch over that way. That's one thing I really like about this, and I really like it for the external dependency piece. It makes things super nice. So if you're this pattern is great. Like what I'm saying is if you're going out and you're going to need to be able to change out component parts. So you isolate them with this pattern, and then you can swap them in and out, and that works really great. One of the things that came up when I was looking at to make sure I had all the use cases covered that I was thinking about was user interface decoupling. Um, so I think we kind of already do that anyway. I mean, you kind of have your mobile views and your different types of views. Um, Mobile views or different types of views. Sorry about that. My phone was going off and make sure we didn't have an emergency. And your different kind of views. I kind of feel like the UI with an exposed API layer is you're kind of already doing that, right? You're kind of letting the browser decide. You have CSS, you have Bootstrap, you have these different things that are formatting your content for different screens. For being honest, web is what is mostly used at the moment. I mean, definitely for sure, there are desktop applications. There are definitely use cases for that, but I feel like those are becoming more and more rare as we kind of progress through time. So I think we've already got that kind of decoupling down. So I'm not a big fan of saying, oh yeah, this is the architecture pattern for that particular thing. I think we're kind of already there. So I wouldn't say this pattern adds anything major to that particular thing. Um, this one I was kind of surprised about. So this one was migrating and refactoring. Okay, so again, let's think about our pattern. We started with a monolith. We realized some of the drawbacks of the monolith after we started deploying things. We started running into some resistance on application change. So we refactored our application to take into consideration or not taken into consideration. We factored our application to be more modular. So now we have individual components, and then from there we went to this hexagonal architecture pattern where we've now isolated those modules and we've made it interface based and plugin based so that we can swap out those modules if we want to. Let's just say we've isolated the inventory system. It's in its own module, and later on we're like, hey, you know what? Maybe we want to do inventory a significantly different way. Maybe we want to be tracking products across two systems. um, um, and so we're going to migrate the whole inventory portion of the application to support this new feature. Because we have these isolated, we can work on these a component at a time, and or a module at a time. Let's be consistent. We can work at these as a module at a time as we do the migration. Migration is never as easy as you think it's going to be. There's always weird hiccups, differing, architecture. Or one of the things that I try so hard to do is when I'm migrating or modifying an existing system is I try to make sure that we don't lose features. That's one of the biggest things I've noticed in my career that can drive customers away from your product or service is I had this feature over here, you did this custom work over here for your application, and now you're moving to this new platform, and I've built my whole entire integration with you around this particular pattern that we were doing. Maybe I ship you an Excel file that you process to sell me extended warranties, something like that. And they built a process around it, and you're going to come to them and say, oh, we don't do that anymore. I mean, that this is not a great experience for your customers or for any consumer of your application. So there's always challenges in this, and like when we were discussing the evolution of the architecture, we come to this point where now we can just kind of hot swap stuff out. And the other really neat thing about this is if I build a new component, so I build a new inventory component system, right? And we deploy it into production. Let's say we did all of our testing, it looked good. And then we get into production and we find that there's a major problem. It's not calculating line totals correctly. It's not pulling the correct price. It's not doing something. We can just swap back. We can just go back to the original implementation and figure out what went wrong, and then we can try again with little or minimal impact to the end user. The last component from ChatGPT, what it was saying was basically it's good for API design. Um, uh, I would kind of argue that one the same with the user interface decoupling it. I think we're pretty solid on like I think by default we're getting okay API designs, especially with the advent of like API management layers and then bundling of microservices to give kind of consistent interface to the end user. So for example, let's just say we have a customer order inventory microservices, right? And someone hits the endpoint, they want to get a list of all of their orders that they've had or that they're processing. And what happens there is we may want to, for ease of use with the customer, just expose one method called get orders by customer ID. But that's actually going to turn around and it's going to make two calls to two different services, combine the results and send them back as though it was one call, right? So there we have that piece and that extensibility layer in there. I guess you could consider it kind of the same pattern. I kind of was thinking about it a little bit differently, but now that I'm talking about it, I could see it. So you could think of the hexagonal architecture pattern here as your API management layer, right? And the idea behind this layer is, manage your API and to make it so that you when you have the API and you're consuming it, that you're presenting it. Your API should have a good interface. That's where I was going with that. The API should definitely have a good interface. And my camera is doing something weird. Sorry, guys. See if I get this a little bit better. Keeps blurring out my face. So what we have here is we have that architecture. Or we've done what we think is a brilliant, good use architecture internally, and we like how everything's broken out, everything's modular. We're kind of following these different patterns, and then we're sticking a layer in front that's kind of exposing, so that they don't have to know to call the customer endpoint, get the customer information, call the order endpoint, get the order information. It's just when the customer gets it, they get their information and they get all the orders or that were related to that particular example. So I do like this pattern, and I think you might kind of already be using it. I kind of default program to interfaces. I like specifically in .NET. I like using their current basically dependency injection layer. And so when you're working with a web application, you could add services, you could add transient, add scoped, add singleton services, and those are all interface driven, right? They don't have to be, but I mean, if you really want to do it, then I think you should do it correctly. You shouldn't be using a concrete type, right? And so when I add a service, I just automatically create an interface for that service. And me personally, this is a personal preference. I could include the interfaces with the service class definition in the same file. I know a lot of people like to separate those out, and that's fine. And if I ever have two implementations of a service, and they both are going to be using the same interface, of course, I would probably break that out. But in most cases, I can get by with here's my interface definition, here's kind of my service layer, and or here's the concrete implementation of that interface definition. So I do like the pattern. I think it has a lot of value, and I think a lot of software is kind of moving in that direction. I appreciate everyone taking the time to attend today. It's just a quick kind of rough draft on some interesting architectural conversations that I was having on LinkedIn today. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and taking a look. And then later on this week, if anyone has any interest, we can go and we could actually do some coding around this particular architecture pattern, kind of see what it looks like in code. I'd love to explore that with you. I hope everyone has a great Monday, and I hope everyone gets a lot done today and for the rest of the week. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good day. Bye.